Here we are to talk about the breakout game and learning JavaScript through programming games. In the last video, we kind of wrapped up creating classes out of all of the original code for the game. So we kind of made it object-oriented. It got a little bit like the object-oriented code is a nice idea, but it's not like the only way to program. So actually the procedural code is kind of nice too. Object-oriented code gives us, it isn't more efficient, but it gives us a way to think about code, right? So things are wrapped up in objects. So like mentally, like it gives us a model for how things work. Procedural code is like maybe harder to understand, right? One isn't more efficient than the other. Object-oriented code also provides some other features that are kind of interesting, right? And one of them is called inheritance. So inheritance is the concept of properties and methods that can be shared across multiple classes, right? If you think about inheritance in real life, like you inherit things from your ancestors, right? So you get your hair color, or you get some property, or you get other features from the people that came before you, right? In software, it works the same way, right? We have some properties here in some of our classes. Like if you look at the brick class, it's got an X and a Y, a width, a height, and a color, right? And it has this status property that's unique to brick. Okay, none of the other objects have this, right? If I look at the paddle, right? Actually, let's move brick over here, right? So we got brick and paddle next to each other, right? When I look at paddle, the paddle has an X and a Y and a width and a height and a color, right? So these guys are very similar, right? If I look at the game label, it doesn't have a width and a height, but it does have an X and a Y and a color, right? And if I look at the ball class, let me move this guy over, right? It has an X and a Y and a color, right? So X, Y, and color belong to everybody, and some of these guys have a width and a height, okay? So why don't we make a class that allows us to give an object an X and a Y and a color property, right? Or maybe let's even give it a width and height too, right? And then all these other classes can share those properties from that one class, right? And in that way, if we need to change how the X and Y work, we can do it in one place rather than going into each of the classes and changing that, right? And we don't have to duplicate code. A lot of these classes also draw themselves in the same way. So if I look at the ball or the brick class, it draws itself as a rectangle. So it's a begin path, rect, or fill style, fill, and close path. If I look at the paddle, it's exactly the same. Begin path, rect, fill style, fill, and close path. So these two actually use the same exact render method, right? So that's duplicate code, right? So, and that's kind of like not a good thing. Like we want to, if we have duplicate code, we want to just put it in one place and then reuse it, right? So in object-oriented programming, inheritance lets us do that for our objects, okay? So I'm going to start by making a new class called a Sprite class. So I'll call it Sprite.js. And the Sprite class, a sprite in game programming is an object on the screen. It can be any object, anything you see on the screen. I'm going to set my tabs here to 2, right, to make the linter happy. Let's put a comment at the top here, just to make this look nice, right? And there we go. So I got the Sprite class, and then we'll give it a constructor, and we'll give it a render method, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the X, the Y, the width, the height, and the color, okay? And you can give these some default values. Maybe I'll do that. I kind of like having the default values in there. So I'll say this will be 0, This will be 0 as a default, and maybe as a default it'll be 10 by 10, right? And the color can be red, right? You can put anything for the default value. And you know, like all of our other classes, we will set the properties here to, you know, they're the values that you passed in as parameters. So I'll do this dot width equals width, and this dot height equals height, and this dot color equals color. And then for the render method, it'll take the CTX, and then like I said, I'm gonna use the same drawing method that we used in both the brick and the paddle. So I'll cut this out of here, or actually I'll just copy it, right? And I'll put it into Sprite, okay? So it's gonna get this X, this Y, this width, this height, and this color. So we know that those properties are held by the Sprite object. But what I want to do now is I want the Sprite class to provide these properties to its you know, child class, okay? And I want the child class to look to its parent or its super class to get those properties, okay? So I've got a new class here, so I'll have to import it into my game. So I'm going to import it here. I'll make a script. I'll say Sprite JS, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the paddle class, and at the top here, let me actually add a comment here to make this look a little better. There we go, right? So I got my paddle class, and in the paddle class here, it's going to take in these parameters X, Y, width, height, color, right? And what, because we want to be able to set those when we create a paddle. But then what we're going to do is we're going to call on, let me change the spacing here to 2. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call on super. Okay, so actually, wait, I'm kind of ahead of myself. Before we call on super, we're going to do one other thing. We're going to say extends Sprite. Okay, so what I'm saying here is I'm saying the paddle class should extend the Sprite class. Okay, so I'm saying the paddle is a specialized form of the Sprite. So it is a Sprite class, and then it has some extra features. Okay, right, and then I can call a super here and pass those parameters in. And actually, you know, the paddle class, the only thing that makes it different from the Sprite class is the move by and move to methods. Okay, so the Sprite class owns the render method and this X, Y, width, height, and color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass these properties here from the constructor. I'm going to pass them into super, and when we do that, that's like we're calling the constructor in the class that we extend. So when we extend the Sprite class, if we call super, it's like we're calling the constructor to initialize the class that we're extending. So if that class that we extend expects some parameters, like this one kind of expects X, Y, width, height, and color, then we'll have to pass those in. And then that's where this class runs its constructor, right, when you call super here. So once we've initialized the X, Y, width, height, and color, we can actually remove these properties here. So we don't need those any longer. Okay, and then the next thing is we can remove the render method because this method actually exists within the Sprite class, right? So Sprite now extends, paddle extends Sprite. Let's take a look and check our game here in the browser and make sure it's still working. Oh wait, I got a problem. Oh, can't find variable Sprite in game.js. Paddle 8. Wait a minute. So I got to make sure that we're importing it, right? let's take a look here. So I got Sprite here. Let me check and make sure I got it over here. I got it here. Let's take a look. What did I make? I made a mistake. Let's see. What is it? Oh, wait, now it's working. I don't know why it did that, right? Now it's kind of working. Let's refresh it again. I guess maybe I didn't save, right? But anyway, there we go, right? So that's kind of helping us out. Let's do, or it's making our code better, right? Less duplication. Let's use the extends keyword again. So let's do one more thing, right? So I like this Sprite class, and when I'm thinking about it, you know what? Actually, this move by and move to properties could be could go with the Sprite class, right? So paddle, instead of having move by and move to, actually, if we take these out and we move them into the Sprite class, we could place them here, and then the Sprite could have them. So now paddle just looks like this, right? So actually, you know, if we did that, we could actually delete the whole paddle class and make a paddle that was a Sprite. So then why would we have an extends, right? Well, you know what? The brick class, let's extend the, we're going to come back and do that in a moment, but let's think about brick for a minute. So brick has X and Y, width, height, color, but then it also has status, which is special. So what we're going to do with brick here, let me actually add a comment at the top here. So we'll say brick, right? And what I want to do is I want to extend Sprite, and then we'll do the same thing we did before. We'll call, let me set the spaces here. We're going to call super, and we'll need to pass in the X, Y, width, height, and color. And once we've passed these into super, we can remove those properties here, and the only property left that belongs to bricks or that makes bricks special is the status property. So we'll leave that there. And remember, render is the same method. It's stored in Sprite, so we can actually delete the render method. Okay? So now we have the Sprite class. We can use that to make a paddle. We can use everything from Sprite to make a brick class that has a special status property, okay? And why don't we do that? So, so let's actually test our code here and make sure it's still working. Oh, can't find variable A inside paddle. I must have typed some weird character there. Let me just check that, right? Oh yeah, I must have. There we go, right? So we got this, right? Everything's kind of working there. Okay, so why don't we get rid of the paddle, right? So we'll close paddle. I'm going to delete the paddle class here. Just delete it. It's gone. Move to trash, right? I'm going to go up here to game, and I don't need to import it, so I'll delete it. And when I go into game.js, I'll find my paddle here, and instead of making a paddle, I'll make a Sprite, right? And then it will get the X, the Y, width, height, and color. And so this can make a paddle. And then the ball and the brick class, right, or the bricks class can initialize the bricks, right? So we'll save that. We'll take a look at our brick here. Everything's working. Let's take a look at our game here. It's still working, right? Let's talk about the ball class. So ball class, this is a challenge for you. The ball class can also extend the Sprite class because it has the X and the Y, and it doesn't have a width and height, but it has the rest of these properties that are special. It's got dx, dy, radius, and then it also has color. So this actually belongs to Sprite. So your challenge is to extend the ball class using Sprite. Okay, so thanks for watching, and then I'll cover that in the next video, and then we can talk about using Sprite to extend the game label. Okay, so thanks for watching.